Throughout Albion's ancient history, there were many great heroes who pursued adventure and honor, while wicked villains sought to enslave and destroy. As this land of wonder entered the Age of Enlightenment, a tyrant emerged with a grand vision, one that would change Albion forever. Every hero and every villain has an origin story, a significant moment that shaped their lives. This man was no different. Even now, looking back, we wonder, was he truly the great evil of this age, or merely a victim of circumstance and manipulation? A pawn for someone much smarter. Who was this great evil of the Age of Enlightenment? What led him to attempt to remake Albion with a single wish? And what was his tragic fate? In this video, we explore the lore, story, and the downfall of Fable 2's antagonist, Lord Lucien Fairfax. Ultimately, this is a tragic tale of what happens when someone is pushed over the edge, having lost everything. So, where do we begin? It had been around 500 years since the abrupt and bloody end of the Age of Heroes, and the Age of Enlightenment had begun. Once a small trading town, Bowerstone had become the greatest city in Albion, renowned as the crown jewel of commerce, adventure, and innovation. From the iconic Bowerstone Bridge to the clock tower to Bower Lake, this region was steeped in history, crafted upon the remnants of what had come before. Along the streets, blacksmiths perfected their art, merchants sold their wares to the bustling population, the town crier called out the news of the day, and guards kept watch for those who might break the law. Over it all loomed a grand castle, constructed by the legendary late alchemist Leo Head. It was another hallmark of the city. Within its walls lived the Fairfax family, whose vast wealth had allowed them to purchase the castle and leave their mark on Bowerstone's history. The Fairfax family held a high status in society. They were beloved not only by the people of Bowerstone, but also by the staff who ran the castle. They appeared to be the perfect family, exactly what Bowerstone needed as its rulers. Yet, not everything was as it seemed. There were whispers that the family harbored many dark secrets within those walls. In rare surviving copies of Lucien the Lunatic, a scandalous, unauthorized biography written by an anonymous author, it was claimed that Lady Ingrid Fairfax was a madwoman who had been locked in the attic. It was also said that this madness was hereditary, running through the Fairfax bloodline. Given what happened decades later, this theory appears to have some merit. The identity of the author was never discovered, at least by the public. Many believe, however, that when copies of Lucien the Lunatic were pulled from store shelves and burned, the author met the same fate. Anyway, as time went on, the Fairfax bloodline continued, and in the generations that followed came young Ellie and Lord Lucien Fairfax. The siblings lived their lives beneath the watchful gaze of Bowerstone's citizens, cherished and admired by all, yet behind closed doors, they were no stranger to the shadow of misfortune that seemed to haunt the Fairfax family. Tragedy was never far away, and one day, it struck in full as Lucien witnessed the untimely death of his beloved sister. As was often the case with the Fairfax family, the circumstances of her death were shrouded in secrecy. Whispers filled the city, but no answers ever emerged. Such a great loss at a young age could have broken Lucien as he mourned, but instead, he used his grief to fuel a desire to change the world for the better. He came to believe it was his duty to transform Bowerstone into a beacon of hope for all of Albion. When he was old enough, Lucien became the owner of Fairfax Castle. As Mayor of Bowerstone, he offered an air of optimism and hope to all who came to his great city. Meanwhile, the world outside of the city walls was dangerous. Bandits roamed the roads in search of traders and innocents to pillage. The grotesque hobs massacred all they encountered, and the woods promised a terrible fate to any who strayed from the beaten path. Bowerstone was a haven for all, and under Lord Lucien's leadership, it even attracted the attention of one person in particular, a woman called Helena. In time, Lucien and Helena married and had a daughter, Amelia. From their home in Fairfax Castle, it seemed as if the Fairfax curse had finally ended and they could live happily ever after. But as we know, in the land of Albion, not every tale is a happy one. Before we can continue with Lord Lucien's tale, we have to go back about 500 years to someone who would become instrumental in his story. The Age of Heroes was a time of powerful magic and whimsical adventures, filled with people who sought to use ancient history to shape the future. Deep in the forest of Albion lay the small farming town of Oakvale, where a terrible moment in history occurred. The evil Jack of Blades and his bandits burned the town to the ground in search for family descended from an ancient heroic bloodline. A young girl called Theresa had been gifted with prophetic dreams, but she did not know how to control her powers. It was during this attack that everything changed. Jack murdered her father, enslaved her mother, and cut out Theresa's eyes when she refused to reveal her brother's location. 4 years after the attack, Theresa lived under the protection of a mighty bandit who had found her crawling in the woods. During this time, she trained her will abilities to see the world with magic, and in time, strengthened her natural ability to peer into the future. The seer Theresa was essential in the fall of Jack of Blades, helping her brother with her powers and visions of what was to come. When Jack was finally defeated, she left Albion to start a new life. Despite the fall of Jack, the embers of vengeance still burned within Theresa as she wandered the world. The memory of her village reduced to ashes and her family stolen away in her youth haunted her steps. Driven by loss and longing, she set out in search for a way to ensure that such darkness would never claim an innocent again. On her journey through the eastern land of Samarkand, Theresa came across a library that contained not only the history and knowledge of Samarkand and Albion's sordid past, but also that of the Old Kingdom. For centuries, the seer lingered within these ancient halls, studying every word the library revealed. In time, she uncovered knowledge that awakened her desire for retribution. She learned that at the height of the Old Kingdom, its rulers, driven by greed, ambition, and the hunger for power, constructed a great spire that acted as a conduit to Albion's will energy. The texts explained that although this kingdom was a land filled with marvels and powerful artifacts, it was a single wish granted by the spire that brought about its ruin. Theresa wanted to rid Albion of the kinds of evil that blinded her. She saw the Spire as the tool that would give her that power. With her prophetic powers, Theresa peered into the future and saw all of the strings, possibilities, and moments that could be woven together to forge a future where the Spire was constructed under her control. For some time, she studied the threads of fate, planning which moments she would need to shape so that only one reality would come to pass. One where the Spire was built for her, and she stood within its heart with all of its power. But for the people of Albion, this vision would come at a terrible cost. Now that we have explored the abridged version of Theresa's backstory, we return to the Age of Enlightenment. Having foreseen exactly what needed to be done to have the Spire constructed, the seer returned to Albion for the first time in centuries to put events in motion. Meanwhile in Bowerstone, Lord Lucien, Lady Helena and young Lady Amelia were beloved by the city's population and enjoyed a life of privilege and admiration. Lucien was a philanthropist. Not only did he possess immense wealth, but he also held considerable sway over Bowerstone, and he approached every goal with relentless determination. Since the death of his sister at such a young age, Lucien had focused his time and energy on the betterment of his city. For Theresa, however, it was essential that Lucien's focus shifted, and she set out to influence him towards building her spire instead. One evening, within the comfortable walls of Fairfax Castle, a shadow crept in past the castle staff and the butler, Jeeves. Helena and Amelia began to complain of pain, each stricken by an illness of unknown origin. Lucien said goodnight to his family, unaware that, by morning, both would be dead. Theresa had spoken of this event to only one person since the catastrophe, a tale she was ashamed to tell. There is a suggestion that she herself was behind the mysterious illness that changed Lord Lucien's life forever. Her need for the construction of the spire outweighed the pain it caused. In her words, the deaths of Lady Helena and Lady Amelia set the board for what was to come. The death of his wife and child was a devastating turning point in the life of Lucien Fairfax. He had fought throughout his life against the Fairfax curse, a madness and mania that had claimed those who came before him. He had used his grief as fuel to forge a better world, but now his perfect happiness had been destroyed. This loss was different.
Tonight, I look down on the mobs crowding the Bowerstone streets and feel a dark, bitter envy. I covet their comfort, their vibrancy, their life. Fairfax Castle is silent. My dear Helena, my cherished Amelia, I miss you both terribly.
Each day that passed was darker than the last. Where once the castle was full of life, the staff left one by one, while the male locked himself away from them and the public. From afar, Theresa watched as his grief consumed him, refusing to accept what had happened and waiting for the perfect moment to pull the next string.
There's no more certain cure for pain than anger, and I'm filled with enough of that to bring the world to a smouldering halt, that people would accept death and despair as part of life, as fate, is beyond my comprehension. I find myself wanting to shout into their ignorant faces, to shake them out of their complacency, for surely they are insane. This world and every living thing in it must surely be insane.
Lucien's anger soon turned to mania, and he became obsessed with finding a way to bring his family back. He knew that in ages past, Albion had been a land filled with magic, where miracles were common, and for some, death was never truly the end. Only Jeeves remained on staff, witnessing how Lucien became a recluse in his study, consumed by ancient texts.
I resumed my research today. I can read for an hour at a stretch before that dark cloud descends upon my mind once more. The moments of clarity I have must suffice, I think. Perhaps in these papers I can find something that will ease my suffering, and even that of others. Perhaps.
With Lucien consumed by this goal, having given up on every other aspect of his life, Theresa believed it was time to move her next piece on the chessboard. The eastern land of Samarkand was not only home to a great library, but also to a brilliant scholar who had devoted years to researching the Old Kingdom. Through Garth, Theresa had covertly distilled the knowledge she had gathered over centuries. Through her influence, they met, each possessing something the other needed. Lucien had the wealth to fund research expeditions abroad, while Garth possessed knowledge of ancient artifacts that could change the world.
I am no longer alone in my research. Garth is from the western reaches of Samarkand, and his work far outstrips my own. He shows a remarkable facility with Old Kingdom artifacts. Today I have watched in wonder as lights, delicately spun like cobwebs, shimmered in solid stone. Remarkable. I have discovered that by the end of their reign, the Archons of the Old Kingdom faced their own mortality with anger. They came to reject the inevitability of death. That we share at least this philosophy is some comfort. They made great efforts to change their world, great efforts. When I mentioned this to Garth, he grew silent. I wonder at this.
Being offered a glimpse of artifacts from ages past, said to bend the world to the will of the user, gave Lucien that confirmation that his family could be returned to him if he found the correct artifact. Although Lucien offered Garth much through his vast wealth, even the scholar worried about Lucien's moments of despair and desperation. Magic had the power to change the world, but what mattered was whether it was used for creation or destruction. It was only when research and images of an ancient spire surfaced that Lucien found his calling, with designs planted by Theresa herself. He was desperate enough to attempt its construction, and narrow-sighted enough to not question its purpose, primed by the seer through torment.
I found it! Images of the tattered spire are now burned into my mind. It is the sun looked upon for too long, the melody that echoes ceaselessly. I found it! The key to a new world. I pray that I have the will to do what I must.
With the Spire as his new purpose, Lucien decided that this was what he would dedicate all his time and energy to. Through Garth's research, they came to understand that the Spire had once been colossal, a conduit of will energy, its shadow stretching across the ancient land. They believed that for something so immense, fragments must still lie hidden somewhere in Albion, a foundation they could possibly build on to restore it. Garth's research pointed to a site now buried beneath the ocean. Following this discovery, Lucien and Garth hired teams to search the oceans, hoping to uncover any remnants of the Spire's lost foundation.
Garth finally capitulated. Together we took a frigate to the site and sent down drag lines. We circled the area for a week, growing more irritable with each day. Then today, our lines hit stone. It is there. It is deep. Unfathomably deep, and yet the task is not impossible. It must not be.
This was a pivotal moment for Lucien. When the Spire was complete, it would grant him the chance to make his wish, to bring back Helena and Amelia. But unknown to Lucien, every step he had taken had already been chosen for him. Theresa's plan to see the Spire rebuilt was unfolding perfectly. As the mayor turned his attention to the next stage of construction, she watched from afar and began to plan how she would take the Spire from him before he could use it. As the architect behind the reconstruction of the tattered Spire, a device meant to focus the will energy of Albion into a single wish, Lord Lucien Fairfax drew up detailed plans, estimated the labour, and calculated how to acquire the resources needed for such a monumental project. Yet, he faced a problem when he realised just how many years the construction would truly demand. This obstacle forced him to confront his own morality and to consider how far he would go to achieve his vision of happiness. Greatness came at a cost.
There is no alternative. Enforced labour is the only way the Spire can be completed within my lifetime. Garth shares my apprehension at this prospect, but I believe he shares my determination as well. Sometimes conventional notions of morality must be subverted, suspended, no matter how difficult that may be. Morality is a fine thing, but taken to its logical extreme, it can hold us back from true greatness.
And so it began. Across Albion, villagers vanished from their fields, adventurers were seized as they wandered lonely roads, and countless others were taken by mercenaries in Lucien's employ. All were shipped across the ocean to the Spire's construction site, condemned to a lifetime of forced labour under the watchful eyes of hired guards. His problems, however, continued when many of the captives refused to work. So, he was forced to find a way to break their will.
Perhaps Westcliff is the answer to the enforcement dilemma. Crucible winners must be of particularly sturdy stock, ideal recruits, physically. As for issues of obedience, I believe I may have found an answer to any dissatisfaction that might develop once they're here. I cannot allow anything to compromise the Spire's construction.
Each day that passed brought Lucien one step closer to seeing his family again, but his actions and his soul grew darker. If Helena and Amelia ever returned, they would find a man changed beyond recognition. He forced his captives to toil day and night on the Spire, and even the guards he hired from Westcliff were little more than slaves themselves. Each wore a collar that inflicted pain with every act of disobedience. As Mayor of Bowstone, Lucien divided his time between the chaos of the Spire and the uneasy calm of the city. Whenever forced to remain in Bowstone, he locked himself away, poring over his research late into the night. The structure itself was only one piece of Lucien's grand design. To activate the Spire and claim its promised wish was a challenge of another kind. Forged as a tool of the Old Kingdom, an age when heroes were everywhere, the Spire could only be awakened by blood from those ancient lineages. Throughout Albion's history, even just 500 years ago, legends like Scarlet Robe, Briar Rose, and Maze walked the land. They were gifted beyond ordinary men and women, able to harness the force of will, command impossible strength, and shape the world with their skill. But the Great Hero Purge, orchestrated by the village of Oakvale, had ended many of these bloodlines. Those who had survived had faded into the shadows. The Age of Enlightenment had ushered in a world where magic was no longer needed to thrive. In this desperate moment, Lucien needed heroes more than ever. During his research, his thoughts turned more and more to Garth. This scholar was far more than a bright mind. He harnessed the raw energies of will itself. Raised in Samarkand, Garth had grown up unaware that people like him were called heroes. Was he what the Spire would need?
Blood seems to be the key. In particular, those whose lineage can be traced back to the ancient line. But where do I find such folk? Can their ancestry be determined with the naked eye? It strikes me that I've not made sufficient note of Garth's peculiarities before now. I shall inquire.
With the Spire's construction advancing, Lucien turned his attention to the hunt for heroes, and to the methods he could use to detect them. The city of Bowstone itself had once lived side by side with the Heroes Guild, an academy that trained the most supremely gifted sons and daughters of Albion. After the Purge, the ruins of this place had been claimed by nature. Lucien managed to acquire a guild-focused disc, quite possibly scavenged from the guild ruins themselves, a device tuned to his desire, able to reveal whether anyone who stepped upon it was a hero, and which discipline they possessed, skill, will, or strength. Until he could find another of these exclusive heroes beyond Garth, his work would have to continue elsewhere.
I feel an unexpected joy at being so far out from the mainland. Here I can imagine that no other ties bind me to this world. No past, no pain, just the great task before me. Now the base is almost complete. Our ships will have a harbor at least. Sadly, today saw the first of our workers fall. This was not unexpected. We must continue regardless.
The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. At least that was what Theresa believed. Every death and injury caused by Lucien's project was a direct result of the Seer's manipulation. She believed that when the Spire was complete, she could use its power to stop any great evil. It would all be worth it. Lucien was not a tyrant or a villain by nature, but through the threads and strings that had made up his life, he had become one. He became a dictator, his empathy fading with each week spent on a construction site that his slaves and guards could never leave.
Each month, it becomes harder to imagine a return to mundane duties. The Spire whispers to me, still faint, but already somehow familiar and comforting. As I lay a hand upon walls that are only now beginning to take shape, I can almost feel the heartbeat of those that came before us. Today, the peace was interrupted briefly by a minor uprising. I had no choice but to deal with it harshly. I do not begrudge the men who stood against me. They do not understand, but they will learn in time. Garth informs me that 4 workers leapt to their death this morning. It is regrettable, and yet I must remain focused. The work is what matters. In fact, I wonder if we should not be less discriminating when it comes to the recruitment of labor. Our progress seems less a function of their efforts and their skill than of their sheer weight in numbers. I shall forgo the use of collars on these men. I believe more traditional forms of discipline will be just as efficient.
Each person dragged to the Spire became nothing more than a tool to shape Lucien's future. Deaths among the workers became routine, and whatever humanity the mayor once possessed had faded to almost nothing. Even Garth began to notice Lucien's growing distance, his lack of empathy and cold determination. Yet the scholar remained blinded by the thrill of the quest he had chosen. As an expert on the Old Kingdom, Garth found it intoxicating to witness the rebirth of the very structure that had ended an age of legends. As the base of the Spire rose, as this conduit connected to Albion itself, the unfinished halls felt the echo and faint thud of the land's natural power source, will.
Today, I felt the first stirrings of will. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Powerful, seductive, and all too brief. I hunger for more. Garth seemed displeased. Beware hubris was all he could think to say. It is becoming clear to me that his thinking, while brilliant, is often conflicted and timid. Can he not grasp the beauty of what we shall accomplish?
Despite all the power and wealth Lucien commanded, the faint connection he felt to Will was something entirely different. Garth understood how dangerous magic could be if used recklessly. He warned Lucien of these dangers, but his main focus was still on what he could learn from the structure. As for Lucien, he practiced what little magic he could, drawing from the thin stream of will that flowed through the Spire. He learned how to put those around him to sleep with a simple spell, but what truly fascinated and frustrated him was what happened when he slept.
My beloved Helena and Amelia still visit me whenever I close my eyes. But last night, my dreams are unlike any that have haunted me before. I saw a blind, hooded woman and other figures, shadowed and gaunt. But sunrise has already stripped us of any meaning it may have held. Is this all my new abilities have to offer? Cryptic visions and prophetic riddles? I'd sooner enjoy a full night of rest.
What is very interesting at this point is that even with his first prophetic vision, Lucien had no idea that the blind, hooded woman was responsible for so much of the misery he had endured in his life. The person who had fed him information and puppeted his actions without him knowing. And as he continued his research into how to power the Spire, he learned that he needed 3 heroes, a hero of each discipline: skill, will, and strength. Although Garth grew more vocal in his criticism of Lucien's reckless experiments with Will and the Spire, Lucien's frustrations only deepened. He suspected Garth was the hero of will he would need, and that meant he had to keep him close.
One question has consumed me of late. If the Spire and its component parts react to will, would not small slivers of the Spire within a man grant him heroic powers? I had prepared an experiment to test this arresting theory, only for Garth's interruption to ruin it. He's becoming a greater impediment the further we progress, yet I have no thought of removing him. Once indispensable for his intellect alone, he is now crucial to this great project in ways he may not even suspect. I hope he does not.
From the kidnapping of hundreds to thousands and the barbaric experiments that created the Commandant, the first human to survive the Shard trials, and the cruel control of the Collared Guards, Lucien had fallen far from the optimistic leader he once was in Albion's greatest city. All of it began with his refusal to accept the tragic, sudden loss of his family. Each day, Lucien felt his connection to Albion's will grow stronger, but then he came across something that unsettled him. A document arrived on his desk, its words heavy with prophecy. A fourth hero would rise, one bearing the power of all three disciplines, and their coming would mark the end of his plans. To Lucien, this hero had to be found and stopped. To Theresa, however, this fourth hero was nothing more than another pawn in her own design to claim the Spire. She only needed to pull a few more strings before this new player would step onto the board.
My life and my purpose lie far beyond Albion's shores now. I shall not stay long in the castle that bears my name. My facility with the technology of the ancients increases exponentially. And today I learned of two promising candidates right here within the city. Could it be that two of the titans I seek are right under my nose? They're only children, but... my dear Amelia.
On a cold winter night in Bowerstone, two children were led through the gates of Fairfax Castle by a city guard under Lucien's employ. Nick, a teenage girl named Rose, and her younger sibling, Sparrow. The two had reportedly come into possession of an Old Kingdom artifact, a music box, and have managed to activate it. Through his research, Lucien knew that only those with heroic blood could awaken such an artifact. He hoped that at least one of these children was a hero of skill or strength. Unknown to him, the children had not found the music box by chance. They had been guided to purchase and activated by a blind woman. As with every part of this tale, it was Theresa who placed them in the right place at the right time, ensuring they would play their part. The children were led to believe that this enchanted box would grant them a single wish, a way to escape the poverty they had fallen into. But as soon as they used it, the relic vanished. Jeeves led them through the shadowed halls of Fairfax Castle towards Lucien's study. Along the way, the children caught a glimpse of Garth leaving a private meeting. He paid them little mind, unaware of the part these children were destined to play. As the children entered Lucien's study, he offered no introduction, only a gentle inquiry about the Old Kingdom music box and asked to see it. Rose explained that they had wound the box up, made a wish, and that it had vanished. The box itself was of no interest to him. It was the fact they were able to activate it. With Rose's answer, Lucien was certain at least one of these siblings possessed the blood of a hero. He sensed the longing for a better life in their eyes and offered hope if they would only follow his instructions and stand upon the guild focus disc. As they did, the guild seal lit up, recognizing the heroic blood that flowed through their veins, but then it showed him something terrible. Neither of these were the hero of skill or strength. One of them was the fourth. This was not the outcome Lucien desired, but he would let nothing hinder his purpose. Without hesitation, he drew his pistol and shot Rose, then turned the weapon on Sparrow. As young Sparrow crashed through the window of that study turret into the frozen streets below, Lucien left his castle for the final time for the Spire. The murder of 2 children was a line Lucien could never return from. He had truly become a villain, but still, he saw himself as the hero. When he reached the Spire, the architect gazed out of its cold stone heights across all of Albion. To his eyes, the world was ruled by chaos, a force that never punished evil and cared nothing for innocence. Chaos devoured the innocent without warning, and humanity was left to accept its cruelties. Yet within the Spire, Lucien saw an instrument of change. Perhaps his wish was not to just bring back Helena and Amelia. Perhaps he was destined to destroy and then remake the world itself. A world without chaos. When Garth learned what Lucien had done to the children he had seen in the castle that night, he confronted him. He saw how far Lucien had fallen and understood the danger that awaited him if he remained, a fate as nothing more than a power source for the Spire. So, Garth fled the Spire and went into hiding. For 10 winters and 10 summers, the Spire grew. So too did Lucien's control over his slaves, and over an army made of both men and Old Kingdom weapons. With the power of ancient shards, vast stones pulsing with Old Kingdom magic, Lucien could send his enhanced soldiers anywhere in Albion in an instant, striking without warning. All the while, Lucien continued his relentless search for the remaining heroes. In the farming village of Oakfield, news reached him of a woman said to possess the strength of 10 men. When his forces arrived to capture her, she fought them off with the help of a wandering adventurer, and then vanished without a trace. Though he failed to seize the hero of strength, Lucien claimed a victory when his commandant tracked Garth to his tower in Brightwood. With his Old Kingdom technology, Lucien was able to not only transport the Hero of Will to the Spire, but also contain both the man and his magic. Despite his victory, Lucien sensed that some unseen force was working against him. How could the Hero of Strength simply vanish? For years, Lucien hunted for the lost hero and the hero of skill, while the Spire rose ever higher, drawing closer to completion. But then, the impossible happened. Garth escaped the Spire, aided by another hero, a hero he thought was dead. Young Sparrow had not died that night. Theresa had known exactly what would unfold when she pushed the siblings to buy and use the music box. She had waited in silence as Sparrow's frail body fell from the study's turret to the frozen street below. Haunted by the loss of Rose, Sparrow was taken by the seer to a local camp, where time and care allowed their wounds to heal. But beneath the surface, Theresa slowly shaped the hero's path, revealing powers and sharpening skills, preparing Sparrow to become the instrument of Lucien's destruction. A weapon crafted in the shadows of grief. But Theresa never revealed the whole truth. She shared only what was needed to steer Sparrow towards her own secret purpose. Following the Spire heist, Theresa had Hammer, the hero of strength, Garth, the hero of will, and Sparrow, the fourth hero. They just needed the hero of skill. Lucien did not know Sparrow had survived, and after Garth's escape, he scattered spies and informants across Albion, desperate to uncover the identity of the hero who had dared to infiltrate his Spire. His fortune seemed to shift when he was approached by Reaver, the infamous scoundrel of Bloodstone. Not only did the pirate offer to deliver Sparrow to Lucien, but his own reputation for marksmanship fit every tale of a hero of skill. With the Spire nearly complete, Lucien wasted no time. When word reached that Sparrow and Reaver were both in the pirate's mansion, he unleashed his forces on Bloodstone, determined to seize them both. Although Reaver had planned to betray Sparrow, he took offense when he learned that Lucien intended to imprison him as well. In the greatest battle of his life, Reaver fought alongside Sparrow, Garth and Hammer against Lucien's most formidable forces. Yet even the giant Shard and the best soldiers proved powerless against 4 mighty heroes. But Lucien now knew the identities of all of his adversaries. He understood that to claim victory, he needed only 2. Be patient. Lord Lucien Fairfax was a very smart and driven man. As his spire reached completion, he thought about what had happened so far in his life. He had lost his family tragically and sought to bring them back, but in his dreams, he saw that face of a blind, hooded woman. The heroes he had sought after all happened to be following a plan too. What if there was someone guiding their actions? And as he waited and merely listened, he found his answer. It was on Hero Hill, above the ruins of the Heroes Guild, that Lucien and his soldiers watched the 4 heroes meet the woman from his dreams. A woman who talked him through a ritual to summon a weapon that would be the tool to defeat him. This woman was not only real, but she was the mastermind behind many of the failures in his life. At this point at least, he still did not know how much of his life had been influenced by her. With the heroes left weakened by the ritual, Lucien saw his chance. He brought himself and his soldiers to the hill. Having foreseen this, Theresa teleported herself away to safety. These heroes had enough power to build a new world, but they wasted it trying to save the old one. In his new world, built upon the ruins of the old, he would be King Lucien. He needed only the 3 heroes for his ritual, so he had them teleported to the Spire. As for Sparrow, Lucien ordered the last of their family killed and shot their dog. He would not allow that bloodline to survive, not in this world or any other. With no hesitation, Lucien shot Sparrow and left them for dead. The creation of the Spire had come at a terrible price. Death, suffering, and unseen hands had shaped its every stone. Now, at the end of all things, Lucien had only one purpose left. He began the ritual, forcing the heroes to serve as living vessels for the Spire's power. The ancient device drained their strength, but then, to Lucien's shock, Sparrow, the hero of Bowerstone, appeared once more. Not only had they survived the gunshot again, but returned with the same music box that had exposed their heroic blood. Lucien demanded the heroes stop, commanding sleep with all the will he could muster, but his power failed him. As Sparrow played the music box, the ritual's energy spluttered and died. Lucien stood on the edge of victory, only to see it torn from his grasp. Weakened and desperate, he tried to persuade the hero that this was no true victory. The world would always steal away what was the most precious. In this moment, some say the hero of Bowerstone delivered the final blow, a shot. Others claim it was Reaver who ended Lucien's reign. However the tale is told, Lucien Fairfax fell to his death in the depths of the Spire, and his defeat marked the end of a long and bitter chapter. The villain of the Age of Enlightenment had fallen, and that was all Lucien Fairfax would be known for. The man who had tried to destroy the world. With him gone, Theresa stepped forward at last and took her place at the heart of the Spire, just as she had always intended.
For 500 years I have been the overseer of this world, used my powers to keep it on its rightful path, and watched as those I loved withered and passed while I endured. Long ago, Albion's future was entrusted to me, not a choice, but a duty. I stand at the periphery of this world, waiting, watching. I am the last of the hero bloodline, all that remains of the old order. I have watched many futures stretch before me, 1,000 strands of possibility, each falling away until only a solitary truth remains, the true destiny of our world.
Lord Lucien Fairfax was absolutely the villain of the Age of Enlightenment, but unlike Jack of Blades or the Corruptor, he was not a villain by nature. He had been crafted into one by Theresa. If anything, Lucien was a victim. Two things can be true at the same time. Yes, he was responsible for the deaths of countless people. Rose, the slaves of the construction of the Spire, and many more, but Theresa was the true mastermind, all in her effort to stop evil. Unfortunately for him, he would go down in Albion's history as yet another Fairfax who went crazy, an old man whose power, drive, and grief simply turned him into a monster. The seer had ripped apart Lucien so that his funds and knowledge would construct her Spire, and she had put Sparrow through an event just as bad, witnessing the murder of their sister so that they would be the assassin to take out the architect. Lucien was not the only villain of Fable 2 and the Age of Enlightenment. So was Theresa. As for her story, with the full power of the Spire and enhanced seer powers, she discovered that what she had read in Samarkand about the Old Kingdom's fall was not entirely true. There was more to Albion's dark history. An evil waited in the void. Something her actions had reawakened. Lord Lucien Fairfax was absolutely a brilliant character, up until that final moment in which he was killed with just one shot, either by the player or Reaver. This is a pretty common issue with what is regarded as the best Fable game, the lack of a final boss confrontation with Lucien. On that topic, I do have to say that Dean Carter, the co-creator of Fable, has stated that the ending of Fable 2 was planned to be completely different, but there were budgetary and time issues. The ending we received was the death of Lucien in the heart of the Spire. The final boss is technically the giant shard in Bloodstone. The plan, however, was to have the 4 heroes fight through the Spire on their way to Lucien, and each one fell, one by one, until only the player remained. All around you, shards of the Spire burst through the ground, and then Lucien began to wish. In this final battle, the world would have warped and changed around the battleground as Lucien's new world faded in and out of focus. But sadly, those time and budget issues meant it never would be. I do like the joke we got in Fable 3 in the Hobbs and Hollows quest when the characters subtly reference how terrible the ending was. On a final note, I want to talk about Fable: The Journey. To get some of the cutscenes shown in this video, those really nice animations that displayed just how much of an influence Theresa had on Lucien's life, I had the displeasure of working through that game. It is clear a lot of passion was put into the writing. I really loved the conclusion to Theresa's story, how she was connected to the main events of Fable, Fable 2 and Fable 3. Even the additional backstory of the first hero, William Black, the Old Kingdom and the Corruptor. I also liked the little we saw of the new locations. What I did not like was the gameplay. The Kinect that this game was built for does not track properly at all. The gameplay is boring, repetitive, and broken. As I navigated another carriage ride, a conflict with Hobbs, or a boss battle, I did not think about the land of Albion and another magical adventure handcrafted by Lionhead, as I did with the original trilogy. I thought instead about that episode of American Horror Story in Season 3 where hell is introduced. In that universe, hell is a traumatic or horrendous moment that you have to live over and over again. I thought a lot about American Horror Story Coven while working through Fable: The Journey, and I knew playing this game over and over again would be that moment for me. I love the Fable series so much, that being only the original trilogy, but playing that game, which I did not finish, almost broke me. I just wanted the nice animations to show you in this video. Aside from having to play the journey, I really loved putting this video together. Story and environment great, gameplay not. That was everything I wanted to say, so if you enjoyed this video, I would love you to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know what you thought in the comments below. I would also like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members: Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Daniel Cal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifix, Jimsy, Average Sol, Azu, Jonas, Yellow Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mehmet, and Kaida Zin. What did you think of this topic? Was Lucien a villain or a victim, and what would you like me to cover next? I loved putting this one together, there was so much to explore. If you want something else like this, let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.